He called Chuck Norris an old man and challenged him to a fight in front of the whole country. But a minute later, the audience fell silent. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The arena glowed under a barrage of strobe lights, its steel bones echoing with the roar of 20,000 fans who had come not for sport, but for spectacle. The giant screen above the ring cycled through clips of roaring victories, pyrotechnic entrances, and viral taunts that had kept the world of professional wrestling fed with drama and adrenaline. Tonight was no exception. The crowd surged with anticipation, their faces bathed in the blues and reds of the LED displays, smartphones held high, capturing every moment for a feed they would refresh 100 times before midnight. This was not the temple of martial skill, it was a cathedral of performance. Troy, the Mauler, Vance, reigning showman of this flamboyant kingdom, stood at the pinnacle of the sport's current wave. 6'5", 260 pounds of sculpted muscle and bravado, Troy had parlayed a short-lived MMA career into an empire built on charisma, cruelty, and carefully calculated contempt. His entrance routines were legendary. Flames, theme songs composed for him, sponsored walkouts flanked by dancers, and LED walls flashing his signature pose. Fists up, mouth wide, ego unleashed. He was the face of the Federation's new line of merch, the cover athlete for their streaming deals, the crown prince of memes and mockery. But what made him a phenomenon wasn't just the show. It was the way he owned the ring, swaggering with that unmistakable blend of youthful dominance and absolute disrespect for the past. Troy had made a brand out of humiliating retired fighters. If you had a belt 10 years ago and a limp today, he would invite you into the ring and use you as a punchline. It wasn't personal. It was performance. He'd built an empire on spectacle, and that meant sacrifices. Nostalgia, reverence, tradition, all roadkill on the highway to likes and pay-per-views. The fans adored him, mostly. The young ones, especially, saw him as the embodiment of what it meant to be strong in the modern age. Loud, viral, undefeated in the arena of attention. He knew the camera angles, the editing rhythms, the cadence of crowd manipulation. Every move he made was a headline, and he bathed in it like a god. That night, the Federation was hosting Iron Knight Legacy Breakers, a pay-per-view event advertised as a collision of generations, even if the card told a different story. There were no real veterans on it, just younger versions of old archetypes. And Troy was the headliner. The final segment of the night was reserved for his latest invention, a live, open challenge to any so-called legend still walking. The producers had approved it with wide grins. Viral gold, they said. It didn't matter if someone answered the call, no one credible would. The idea was mockery. Elevate Troy by diminishing ghosts. As the moment approached, the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to black. Then a countdown, dramatic and booming, began to shake the stadium's floor. 10, 9, 8. By the time it hit 0, Troy was already halfway through the ramp, storming out to his own music, an explosive metal track layered with the sound of thunder and a growling voice repeating his name. Vance, Vance, Vance. He wore a trench coat stitched with mirrored panels that caught the fire of the stage lights and sent it spiraling into the crowd. His eyes burned with that familiar blend of mischief and malice. He stopped at the edge of the ring, lifted a mic, and soaked in the screams. "Let's talk about legacy," he said, voice echoing through the speakers. "Let's talk about the past, about those old posters in your dad's garage, about those rusty VHS tapes that made people think fighting was something holy." The crowd roared. Some cheered, some booed. but they all listened. Tonight, I'm offering a gift. I'm offering a stage to any so-called legend who thinks they still got it. Anybody with gray hair and enough spine to stand up from their recliner, come down. Let's show the world what happens when myth meets muscle. The arena cameras scanned the crowd, mostly for effect. It was just part of the act. And then the camera paused. On the main screen, a figure came into focus. Sitting in the third row, hands folded, expression unreadable, was a man in a dark denim shirt and a plain black cap. He looked older than most in the crowd, not by a few years, but by decades. His beard was trimmed, white streaks blending into the hard lines of his jaw. His posture was upright, calm. The name flashed across the screen in a font too clean to feel accidental. Chuck Norris. The reaction was instant. The front rows turned, hands flying to their mouths. The camera caught it all. Some laughed in disbelief, others gasped. Even the announcers paused, their scripts fizzling in their earpieces. Troy turned slowly, as if savoring the tension. "Oh, ho, ho," he laughed. "Now this is perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, the meme himself, the roundhouse heard around the world. The Grand Master of Boomer Foo." The crowd stirred. Some laughed, others fell silent. "Mr. Norris, I didn't expect a visit from the past tonight. You here to relive the good old days? Want to sell some vitamins? Maybe show us your famous slow-motion kick before you turn in for the night?" Chuck didn't respond. He merely nodded once. No smile, no anger, just acknowledgement. The kind that doesn't beg for attention but demands it. Troy kept going. "Come on, Chuck, you're already here. Let's give the fans a real throwback. 1 minute, 1 round. Exhibition match next week, what do you say?" The arena crackled. Phones were out, feeds went live, Twitter began to burn. The production team scrambled behind the scenes. Every executive watching from their glass booth knew what this meant. The ratings would go nuclear. The fight was absurd, but so was every great viral moment. Chuck raised one hand. Not a fist, not a finger, just a hand. He gave a single thumbs up. He accepted. Troy spun on his heel, grinning wide. "There it is, folks. The legend steps up. Next week, Iron Night becomes Historic Night." The crowd erupted. The commentators stumbled to reframe the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it live. Chuck Norris, the one and only, has accepted the challenge. Exhibition rules. 1 round. 1 chance to prove the past can still hit back." But deep inside the spectacle, somewhere behind the layers of noise, laughter, and manufactured hype, something else stirred. Something slower, quieter. Not a desire to win, not even to fight. A lesson was beginning to unfold. One that wouldn't be taught through noise or fists, but through stillness, presence, and the kind of discipline that doesn't age. Chuck Norris stood, shook a few hands politely, and exited the arena through the side, his pace unhurried, as if none of this surprised him. As if he had been waiting for this moment long before Troy Vance ever threw his first punch. And in the wake of that quiet departure, the crowd kept buzzing, drunk on the promise of humiliation. They didn't know yet that this would not be a clash of strength versus age. It would be a revelation. And Iron Night would never mean the same thing again. The morning after the challenge, the internet was on fire. Across every social platform from Twitter to TikTok, the clip of Troy Vance calling out Chuck Norris had been reposted, remixed, memed, and debated. Millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #Chuck vs. Troy, #Legend or Laughingstock, and the more venomous #Wheelchair Roundhouse began trending globally. The video edit that caught the most attention came from one of Troy's own team members. An overproduced highlight reel set to pounding dubstep music, flashing between images of Troy flexing shirtless in slow motion and spliced footage of Chuck from old action films, intentionally grainy and dated, overlaid with subtitles like, "When your grandpa thinks he can still drive." The final frame? Troy holding a walker and winking. It was cruel. It was calculated. It was brilliant. By noon, the fight had been officially confirmed by the Federation, now rebranded not just as a match but as the cornerstone of a week-long promotional campaign. Past meets present. Exhibition rules. 5 minutes. No official winner, but the marketing suggested otherwise. Posters flooded the streets, Chuck's face airbrushed and cropped to look even older, while Troy loomed large above him with the tagline, "Time to put the old dog down." The fight had become a punchline before either man stepped into the ring. Troy relished it. In interviews, he leaned hard into the persona. On a popular sports podcast, he sipped an energy drink branded with his own logo and smirked into the mic. "I mean, come on," he said. "Chuck Norris is a legend, sure, like in a museum. You don't pull out a sword from the Civil War and try to take on a drone strike. This is a celebration. I'm giving the fans closure. We're closing the book on fairy tales." The host laughed, feeding the flame. "You worried at all, though? I mean, memes aside, the man has a real martial arts record." Troy waved it off. "So does my Uncle Randy. He also plays Wii bowling with a knee brace. Chuck's got the spirit, I'll give him that. But spirit doesn't survive when I start throwing leather." The more he mocked, the more the machine rewarded him. Followers skyrocketed. Merchandise sold out. A TikTok campaign launched under the name #TroyTime, inviting fans to upload videos of themselves doing their best Chuck Norris impression before getting wrecked by someone younger. Teens dressed in fake mustaches and jeans mimed slow kicks and brittle falls. It was viral gold. Troy had played the algorithm like a piano, and the world danced to his tune. But not everyone was laughing. On the other end of the cultural spectrum, a quiet undercurrent of resistance began to form. Veterans from the martial arts community, old-school MMA fighters, and even younger athletes who'd trained in traditional disciplines voiced their unease. On a live stream, a retired judo champion named Maria Kwan sat across from a host who expected jokes. Instead, she spoke with calm conviction. "I'm not saying Chuck's going to win. That's not the point," she said. "But what we're watching isn't just a marketing gimmick. It's disrespect wrapped in entertainment. Martial arts isn't about age. It's about principle, control, mastery, and those things don't retire when your knees start to creak." Somewhere between the noise and the reverence, public opinion began to divide. Half the audience salivated for a takedown, literal or metaphorical. The other half watched with discomfort, sensing something unjust in the air, even if they couldn't articulate it. Through it all, Chuck remained silent. He gave no interviews. He posted nothing on social media. There were no training montages, no statements, no flashy preparations. The press tried to find him, tracking down his agent, sending drones over his ranch in Texas, even offering money to past acquaintances. Nothing surfaced. It was as if Chuck had stepped back into the shadows from which he had quietly emerged. Only one shaky video, posted anonymously, showed him outside a small martial arts studio in rural New Mexico, bowing before a wooden dummy as the sun rose behind him. The man didn't need the world to watch him train. That was never the point. Inside the production offices, the Federation's executives weren't worried. They had what they needed: attention. As the event drew nearer, ticket prices doubled, then tripled. The arena sold out. Cable providers reported pre-sale numbers higher than any exhibition match in a decade. Advertisers flooded in. Troy was pleased but not content. For him, this was not just a moment to shine, it was a statement. He'd grown up watching Chuck Norris movies on cable reruns, not with reverence, but with boredom. The plots were slow, the fights predictable, the pacing stiff. As a child of fast-cut YouTube and endless combat sports evolution, Troy had come to equate slowness with weakness, quiet with irrelevance. He didn't hate Chuck Norris, but he didn't fear him either. In private, however, the cracks began to show. During one of his final training sessions, Troy's longtime coach, Marco Ruiz, tried to inject a note of caution. "Look," Marco said, adjusting his ball cap as Troy hit the heavy bag with rhythmic fury. "I get the theater. I get the promo. But just remember, this man's not a prop. You saw the footage. He still moves like he's got a metronome built into his spine." Troy barely turned. "It's controlled sparring. 5 minutes, no KO. It's nothing." Marco approached slowly, concern thickening in his voice. "Doesn't matter. The guy's been living this longer than you've been alive. You're walking into the cage with someone who doesn't care about winning. That makes him dangerous." Troy stopped, wiped sweat from his brow, and laughed. "He's 85, Marco. You hear yourself? You're worried about arthritis and muscle memory. Don't be. I'll keep it clean. Make it look good. Let him land a kick for the camera. Then I'll drop the curtain." Marco didn't reply, but as he walked away, his shoulders were heavy. He'd seen too many fighters confuse attention with control. Too many warriors undone, not by fists, but by what they carried inside. The pressure to dominate, the refusal to listen, the belief that the story was already written. As the days ticked down, the arena in Los Angeles transformed. Billboards glared from every major freeway. Giant posters hung from buildings downtown. One half showing Troy in a golden crown and robe, muscles rippling. The other half, Chuck, small, shadowed, leaning on a cane that he had never actually used. The promotional team spared no expense. Even the fight's promo video aired during a major basketball game, complete with dramatic narration. This isn't a fight, it's a reckoning, a farewell to fantasy. The past meets the present. Only one survives. But amid the flash and spectacle, something else was building. In forums, in gym basements, in old dojos and quiet corners of the internet, people talked. Not as fans of Troy or Chuck, but as students of the art. They remembered the silence of a kata, the stillness before a strike, the weight of a black belt earned, not worn. For them, this wasn't a contest. It was a test, not of strength, but of meaning. The night before the fight, Troy live-streamed from his hotel suite, glass walls overlooking the glowing skyline. Behind him, his entourage laughed, music thumped, champagne poured. He stood center screen, shirtless, flexing. His fans flooded the chat with emojis and fire. "Tomorrow," he said, "we say goodbye to the Chuck Norris myth once and for all. I'll make it fun, I'll make it fast, and when it's over, I'll help the old man to his feet. Respectfully." He winked, millions watched, thousands laughed, and Chuck, somewhere far from the neon lights, bowed again in an empty studio as the sun rose over the desert. Alone, centered, and utterly unafraid. The storm was nearly here, and the world didn't realize that the eye of it was not Troy's fists or fame or fury. It was the stillness waiting at the center of the ring. The city pulsed with expectation. By late afternoon, every highway leading into downtown Los Angeles clogged with traffic. Helicopters hovered overhead, capturing aerial shots of the glowing T-Mobile Arena, now adorned with massive digital screens looping the fight's promo on a continuous loop. On each screen, Chuck's solemn face flickered beside Troy's cocky grin. The tagline blazed in bold letters across the frame. Past meets present, the final round. Outside the arena, lines stretched for blocks. Vendors hawked merchandise. T-shirts with Troy's face, foam fists, novelty canes labeled Chuck's Walking Stick, even energy drinks rebranded for the occasion. Spectators from across the country arrived in droves, many dressed for the spectacle rather than the sport. Painted face and glittered hats, camera crews chasing influencers filming live reactions. It didn't feel like a fight night. It felt like a coronation. Inside, the production team buzzed with tension. Camera operators rehearsed angles. The commentary booth fine-tuned their scripts. Troy's name was printed on cue cards in big, bold letters with a list of pre-approved catchphrases for commentators to weave in during the bout. Everything was orchestrated for maximum entertainment. The fight was scheduled near the end of the main card, just after the celebrity tag team event and before the final musical performance by a chart-topping rapper. In the broadcast truck, the director barked timing orders, ensuring Chuck's entrance would align with a specific camera dolly sweep and a lighting change designed to make him appear epic and old. In the locker rooms, the contrast between the two fighters couldn't have been starker. Troy's suite resembled a party. Loud music pulsed from Bluetooth speakers. Members of his entourage snapped photos and bantered as his personal stylist adjusted his robe, which shimmered in gold and crimson. His hands were already wrapped, gloves ready, and his coach, Marco, sat in the corner, quiet, arms crossed. No one spoke to him. They didn't need to. He wasn't part of the show anymore. Troy stood before a mirror, admiring his reflection, flexing subtly, tilting his chin just enough to see how it would look on camera. He didn't look nervous. He looked thrilled. "Time?" he asked. One of the assistants checked a headset. 7 minutes. Troy nodded. "Let's make history." Just across the corridor, the locker room assigned to Chuck Norris was quiet. The floor was bare. There were no banners, no music, no entourage. Just a single folding chair, a bottle of water, and the man himself. He sat, gloved hands resting on his thighs, back straight, eyes closed. No one disturbed him. Even the production assistants left after dropping off a plain gray towel. For nearly an hour, he had barely moved. In that stillness, time seemed irrelevant. Chuck didn't count minutes or recite affirmations. He simply breathed. Every inhale was a return. Every exhale, a letting go. The energy in the arena, the roars beyond the concrete walls, the thumping bass, none of it touched him. The knock on the door came exactly on schedule. "Mr. Norris? 3 minutes." He opened his eyes. They were clear and quiet. As he rose, every movement was precise. No rust, no hesitation, just presence. He picked up the towel, slung it over his shoulder, and nodded once to the assistant, who hurried to lead him toward the tunnel. Inside the arena, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as the announcer's voice boomed through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time." The Jumbotron flashed the official match card. Exhibition bout, 5 minutes, no decision. Then came the music. Thunder cracked, followed by electric guitar riffs, lights strobing in rhythm as the crowd surged to its feet. Troy Vance's entrance began with a dramatic curtain drop. Flames erupted along the ramp. Giant screens displayed a highlight reel of his past fights, spinning kicks, post-knockout poses, viral memes. He emerged in his glittering robe, arms outstretched, soaking in the cheers and jeers alike. He moved like a king. Confident, arrogant, magnetic. He slapped hands with fans, winked at cameras, stopped mid-ramp to strike his signature pose. The stadium loved it. They knew this dance. This was the entertainment they had paid for. As he climbed into the ring, he did a lap, pounding his chest, nodding to the front row where celebrities sat, actors, athletes, influencers, all watching him. His music faded, the lights shifted again, and then the arena dimmed to near darkness. A single spotlight illuminated the tunnel. No music played, no narration, no pyro. Chuck Norris walked out alone. Wearing a plain black tie and dark shoes, he moved at a natural pace, hands relaxed at his sides. The contrast with Troy was jarring. There was no flash, no posing, no sound beyond his footsteps, and the murmurs spreading through the crowd like a slow wave of confusion. Some began to clap. Others watched in puzzled silence. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. His gaze was fixed on the ring. As he stepped onto the mat and into the ropes, he bowed slightly. Then he walked to his corner and stood. The two men faced each other as the announcer, Big Marty DeLeon, stepped into the center. In this corner, weighing in at 261 pounds, undefeated in professional exhibition matches, the reigning king of the ring, Troy the Mauler Vance. Troy lifted both arms, soaking in the crowd. Cheers erupted, mixed with whistles and chants. He strutted forward, fists raised. And in this corner, former world karate champion, martial arts icon, and living legend, Chuck Norris. No cheering this time, just silence. Not out of disrespect, but something else, something like awe. The referee brought them to the center. He was a seasoned official who had worked dozens of televised fights, but even he looked uncertain as he gave the standard instructions. 1 round, 5 minutes, clean exhibition. Touch gloves if you'd like. Troy extended his glove with a smirk. Chuck touched it briefly. No expression, no words. They returned to their corners. The bell rang. Troy exploded forward. It was exactly what everyone expected. A fast, aggressive opening designed to overwhelm, to dominate early. He threw a jab, a feint, a heavy cross. Chuck didn't react. He simply wasn't there. He shifted subtly, letting the punches pass through air. His movement wasn't flashy, it was minimal. Clean. Troy pivoted, launched a spinning heel kick. The crowd roared, but Chuck ducked, moved inside the arc, and stepped away. 30 seconds in, Troy had landed nothing. The energy shifted. The crowd, expecting blood, began to murmur. Troy came again, faster, more urgent. A flurry of hooks and uppercuts, all missed. Chuck didn't strike back. He didn't counter. He simply moved. To the trained eye, it was breathtaking. To the casual fan, it was confusing. Why wasn't Chuck fighting? Troy's smirk faltered. He pressed harder. A jab landed, not cleanly, more of a graze, but it drew cheers. Troy smiled, nodded, raised his arms. Chuck lowered into a stance, weight centered. Still no attack. Then came the moment. Troy threw a high kick. Chuck sidestepped, shifted his weight, and without warning delivered a palm strike to the chest. Clean, sharp, controlled. Troy stumbled back. Not from pain. From shock. He stared at Chuck as if seeing him for the first time. Chuck didn't move. The crowd sensed it. The fight wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. 2 minutes in, Troy's breathing grew heavier. Sweat slicked his temples. He swung wide, desperate now. Chuck dodged with a turn of the shoulders, a step to the side. Then, finally, he struck again. A low sweep, not to damage, but to disrupt balance. Troy staggered. Chuck didn't follow up. He didn't need to. The audience was no longer roaring. They were watching. Truly watching. Chuck had thrown 2 strikes, and the fight was already his. In the corner, Marco stood up. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were wide. He'd seen the shift. 3 minutes. Troy hesitated before his next attack. He feinted left, then tried a takedown. Desperation now, reverting to his MMA past. Chuck met him with a sprawl so perfect, so fluid, it looked rehearsed. He didn't just defend it. He redirected it, using Troy's own momentum to roll him sideways. No ground and pound. No pose. Just space. 4 minutes. Troy was on his knees, panting, not injured, not bleeding, but dismantled. Chuck stepped back. Troy stood slowly, no longer cocky, no longer smiling. He circled, searching. Chuck raised his guard, traditional karate stance. Calm, still. Troy charged one last time, a wild right hook thrown from desperation. Chuck blocked it, and with a single movement, spun behind him, tapped his shoulder, and gently pushed him forward. Troy stumbled, caught himself on the ropes. He turned, blinking, lost. The bell rang. The fight was over. No knockdown, no KO, no scoreboard, but everyone knew what had just happened. Silence fell over the arena for a full 3 seconds. Then came the sound. Not the roar of a crowd celebrating victory, but the slow, growing thunder of something deeper. Respect. Applause began, first in pockets, then spreading, rising, until 20,000 people were on their feet, not for the spectacle, but for the stillness that had shattered it. Chuck Norris bowed once, then turned to leave the ring. No interviews, no speeches, just silence. Troy remained in the center, alone, and for the first time in his career, he didn't know what to say. He stood in the center of the ring, sweat pouring down his neck and dripping from his fingers. The bright lights above no longer felt like a spotlight, but an interrogation lamp. Troy the Mauler Vance, the undefeated showman, the king of virality, the face of a generation obsessed with dominance and delivery, stood in front of thousands and had nothing left to give. Not from exhaustion, not from injury, but because the man across from him had taken nothing, and, in doing so, taken everything. The sound of the bell still echoed faintly in his ears, yet it wasn't the end of the round that shook him. It was the silence after. Not an awkward pause, not confusion, but a kind of still reverence that made him feel like a trespasser in a sacred place. And Chuck Norris? He hadn't left the arena in triumph. He'd walked away like a monk leaving a temple, head high, posture straight, as if the noise and the lights and the crowd had never even existed. Troy blinked against the lights and finally turned to his corner. Marco met him there, holding the ropes open, but his face said everything. No gloating, no pity, just quiet understanding. Troy stepped through the ropes like a man exiting a courtroom. The backstage corridor was lined with crew, fighters, sponsors, agents. No one said a word as he passed. Some nodded, some looked away. Inside the locker room, the noise returned. Low chatter from assistants, the shuffling of duffel bags, water bottles being cracked open. The music had been turned off. No one dared play it again. Troy sat heavily on the bench, staring at his gloves. He hadn't been knocked down, but he'd never felt so leveled. Across the city, the internet burned. Within minutes of the final bell, clips from the fight flooded social media. But, unlike the usual highlight reels of spinning elbows or brutal KOs, the clips focused on something almost unheard of in modern combat sports: control, a silent sidestep, a parry that redirected a storm, a palm strike that caused no visible damage but shifted the weight of the entire match. Someone posted a slow-motion edit of Chuck's sprawl during the takedown attempt, comparing it to a calligraphy stroke. Others uploaded side-by-side footage of Troy's pre-fight bravado, and the moment his eyes widened mid-ring after Chuck's second strike. Hashtags reversed their tone. What had begun as a campaign of mockery turned into a study of grace under fire. Hash, respect the legend. Hash, stillness wins. Hash, Chuck Norris is real. The mainstream media scrambled to catch up. Sports anchors who'd rolled their eyes a week earlier now sat upright, their voices tinged with reverence. MMA analysts broke down the exhibition like it had been a title bout. Experts in body mechanics slowed footage to highlight how Chuck used leverage and redirection rather than raw power. Even non-sports outlets ran with the story, calling it a generational reckoning. But the most unexpected shift came from the fans. Those who had once followed Troy for his brashness, his chaos, his entertainment, began to ask different questions. Not just about the fight, but about themselves. Why had they laughed? Why had they expected humiliation to be the only possible ending? And what did it say about them that silence, presence, and self-control had stunned them more than any punch ever could? Troy saw the headlines. He read the comments, and for the first time in his career, he didn't respond. No statements, no counter-tweets, no bravado. He couldn't find the words. Hours passed, the arena emptied, the lights dimmed. Back in his locker room, alone now, Troy finally stood. He looked at himself in the mirror, the reflection staring back without the usual armor of ego. His jaw was unmarked. His eye wasn't swollen. His body was fine. But something deeper had cracked. Later that night, in the hotel room overlooking the city, he stood at the window, bathrobe loose around his shoulders, staring out at the blinking lights below. His phone buzzed constantly. Agents, sponsors, journalists, and fans. He ignored them all. Then, finally, one message caught his eye. It was from Marco. "You okay?" Troy didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air like the silence after a missed punch. Finally, he typed back, "I don't know." A pause. Then another message came. "That's a start." He turned off the phone and stood in the quiet. Somewhere out there, Chuck had already disappeared again. No post-fight interviews, no press conferences, no gloating. He hadn't even posed for the photographers waiting at the tunnel exit. He had walked straight through the back, declined the limo, and taken a cab. Someone had said he was already on his way back to Texas. The Federation, still drunk on the attention, scrambled to turn the narrative. They flooded the media with follow-up content. A new set of T-shirts launched, Chuck versus Time tapped out. But the tone had shifted. Fans didn't want another joke. They wanted something real. And Troy felt it. He returned to social media the next evening, but not with a promo, not with a meme. He sat in front of his phone camera, no makeup, no lights, no soundtrack. Just him. In a hoodie, eyes shadowed with fatigue, he pressed record and spoke. "I thought I understood fighting." He paused. "I thought it was about being the loudest, the strongest, the most watched. I thought it was about domination." Another pause. "And then I stood in a ring with a man who didn't raise his voice, who didn't hit to hurt, who didn't care who was watching. And I realized I've been playing a different game." He exhaled slowly. "Chuck Norris didn't beat me. He didn't need to. He showed me something I didn't know I was missing, something I think a lot of us are missing." He looked directly into the lens. "I'm not done fighting, but I'm done pretending I understand what it means to be a fighter." The video ended there. Within hours, it had millions of views. Not for shock, not for entertainment, but for honesty. Days passed, the noise dimmed, and yet the ripple continued. In a quiet dojo in West Texas, Chuck Norris stood in front of a line of students. The floors were wooden, the mats worn smooth. No cameras were present, no reporters, just the sound of breath, movement, and respect. Among the students, a new face stood at the far end, head bowed, posture stiff, unfamiliar with the cadence of humility. Troy, no robe, no crowd, just a white GI and a focused silence. Chuck didn't announce his arrival. He didn't offer applause. He simply nodded once and began the lesson. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The dojo was quiet. Morning sun slanted through the long windows, cutting golden stripes across the polished floorboards. Dust floated in the light, undisturbed. The walls were bare except for a single calligraphy scroll hanging above the entrance, the characters hand-brushed and weathered, discipline before mastery. No logos, no mirrors, no trophies, just space. Clean, deliberate, silent. Troy stood at the far edge of the mat, his feet shoulder-width apart, hands at his sides. The GI he wore was stiff, unadorned, no patches, no name tag. It felt like armor and exposure all at once. His knuckles ached faintly, though not from contact, from stillness. Every fiber in his body, trained for power, twitch reflex, and explosive movement, now strained against the calm. He breathed in slowly, then out, trying to match the rhythm of the others. They moved together, a small circle of students, 8 in total, each tracing the contours of a kata passed down through decades. The movement was subtle, controlled. It lacked the speed and brutality of MMA or the theatrical force of televised fighting. Yet, there was a weight to it that Troy couldn't explain. Every pivot, every stance, every breath felt like it belonged to something older than technique, something deeper. Chuck Norris stood at the front. He wore a black ga faded to charcoal and a belt so worn its original color had long since disappeared. His movements were slow and economical, and yet the room followed his pace like planets around gravity. He didn't speak. He didn't correct. He didn't lead in the way Troy was used to. He just moved, and they moved with him. When the sequence ended, Chuck turned slowly and bowed. The students followed. Troy hesitated, then did the same. It had been 2 weeks since he'd arrived here. No cameras, no announcement. Just a quiet text reply from Chuck after Troy's message. If you're serious, come to the dojo. Be ready to learn. Since then, Troy had been showing up at 6 a.m. every day. He scrubbed mats before class, stacked pads, sat in silence with the others. Not once had Chuck acknowledged who he was beyond a polite nod. Not once had anyone asked for photos, autographs, or stories about the ring. If they recognized him, they never let it show. In this place, every student started the same. That afternoon, as the others filtered out after training, Troy stayed behind. He sat cross-legged in the far corner of the dojo, a water bottle in his lap, watching as Chuck rolled up the tatami mats. There was no urgency in his movements, only care. Troy waited until the last mat was stacked against the wall. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. Chuck looked over, one eyebrow slightly raised. Troy hesitated. "Back in the ring, during that exhibition. You could have hit harder. You could have dropped me. Why didn't you?" Chuck picked up his towel and began wiping down the edges of the wooden floor. He didn't answer right away. "Because that wasn't the lesson," he said eventually, not looking up. Troy frowned. "What do you mean?" Chuck sat down across from him, towel folded in his lap. His face was lined but alert, as if age had carved away everything but clarity. "You came into that ring expecting a fight," he said, "but you didn't need punishment. You needed to see what happens when noise fades, when ego collapses, when there's nothing left but the truth of who you are. Troy didn't speak. Chuck continued. Most people train to win. Some train to dominate. A few train to understand. Those are the dangerous ones, because they aren't bound by audience or outcome. They fight without needing to prove anything. Troy looked down at the floor. That used to be me, maybe. When I first started, I wasn't always like this. Chuck nodded. Fame is noise. I can't hear your heartbeat, only you can. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted, purposeful, like everything in this space. That night, Troy stayed late. He watched old tapes, not his own, but grainy recordings from decades ago, tournament footage of Chuck in his prime, sparring sequences, teaching demonstrations. What struck Troy most wasn't the power. It was the control, the restraint. Even then, even in youth, Chuck moved like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to preserve. The following morning, Troy arrived before dawn. The dojo was still locked. He sat on the front step, hoodie pulled tight around his head, breath visible in the morning chill. When Chuck arrived 20 minutes later, he simply nodded, unlocked the door, and walked inside. That day's session was different. There was no kata, no structured class, just Chuck and Troy, barefoot on the mat, circling. Chuck spoke very little. He let movement be the language. He tested Troy's balance, his breath, his timing. Every attack Troy threw was met not with retaliation, but redirection. Chuck didn't absorb his energy. He returned it, softly, precisely, like turning a river with a stick. Troy tried to match speed with speed, power with power, but nothing landed clean. Eventually, exhausted and breathless, he dropped to one knee. "I don't get it," he gasped. "You're not stronger than me, not faster, but it's like you know what I'm doing before I do it." Chuck offered him a hand. Troy took it and stood. "It's not about prediction," Chuck said. "It's about presence. You're fighting a ghost of who you think I am. I'm just here. Now." Troy stared at him, chest heaving. "How long does it take?" he asked. "To learn that?" Chuck smiled faintly. "Longer than 2 weeks." Later that day, after the evening class had ended and Chuck was preparing to lock up, Troy lingered by the doorway. "You think I can change?" he asked. "Really change. Not just how I fight, but who I am." Chuck turned off the lights, leaving only the low glow from outside. "I think you already started," he said. The next few months unfolded in rhythm. Troy kept training, kept listening. He stopped checking his phone during breaks. He deleted apps. He stopped rehearsing sound bites. Something softened in him, not in his body, but in his attention. He began to hear more, to notice details, how Chuck's posture shifted slightly before a movement, how each breath aligned with intention. He stopped asking for answers and began asking better questions. When he left the dojo each day, it wasn't to return to noise. It was to reflect. Then came the call. The Federation wanted him back. A rematch was scheduled, not with Chuck. That moment had passed, sacred and untouched, but against a new rising star, a brash 24-year-old striker named Malik Blaze. Undefeated, fast, hungry, everything Troy had once been, down to the catchphrases and social media persona. Troy didn't answer right away. He went to the dojo and sat with Chuck on the bench outside. "They want me to headline," he said, "but I don't want to go back to who I was." Chuck watched the sun setting over the horizon, a deep amber spilling across the parking lot. "Then don't," he said. "Walk in with who you are now." Troy nodded. The night of the fight, the arena looked the same, but he didn't. No theatrics, no dancers, no theme song. He walked to the ring alone, hoodie over his head, eyes steady. He didn't play to the camera, didn't shout, just stepped inside the cage, bowed slightly, and waited. The crowd was confused. Murmurs spread. The commentators speculated. Has Troy lost his edge? Where's the fire? But inside the cage, Troy stood rooted. The fight began. Malik came fast, furious. Trash talk flew between strikes. Troy didn't answer. He absorbed, redirected, responded. And in the third round, when the opening came, he didn't go for the knockout. He locked in a submission, clean, tight, and released the moment the tap came. No celebration, no chest beating. He simply stepped back and helped Malik to his feet. The arena watched in stunned silence. Then, slowly, they stood. The ovation wasn't for victory, it was for something else, something rarer. After the fight, he took the mic, not because the cameras demanded it, but because the moment deserved it. I used to think strength was about domination, he said, about being louder, hitting harder, shining brighter. But I learned something. From a man who doesn't need to raise his voice to change a room. He looked toward the side of the arena. Chuck sat in the front row, hands folded, calm as always. Troy nodded. True strength, he said, doesn't shout. Later that night, when the arena emptied and the lights dimmed, Troy walked backstage to find a single message waiting on his phone. From Chuck, 6 a.m. tomorrow. The path continues, and without hesitation, Troy smiled and replied, I'll be there. Because now he understood. Victory wasn't a belt. It was who you became in the silence that followed. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, watch the next one, and share this video with someone who needs to see it.